What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Sins of Sinister, and in this one, we're covering Nightcrawlers, which is amazing, because the ending of this is gonna be pretty nuts. So, here's the way this works. So, as you guys know, with the Sins of Sinister storyline, that Marvel is basically releasing 3 different comics, essentially, that show us what's going on during this 10-year time period going into the future, when Sinister basically conquers everything. And so what this does is this initially picks up in the Sanctum Sanctorum, right, of Doctor Strange. And what we end up having here is, in effect, Banshee. Now, this is a version of Banshee that we haven't really talked about yet, and in fact, it's a version of his character that has been introduced relatively recently in the Legion of X storyline in the new era of Marvel Comics X-Men stuff. But the idea behind this guy possesses what's called the spirit of variance. Now, one of the big questions that I'm sure people are kind of asking here is that in this time when Sinister's conquered everything, with somebody like Banshee or even with the character of Doctor Strange, what's Stephen Strange doing at the moment that he's not even in his own Sanctum Sanctorum? Well, the answer to that is simple, guys. He is using an app called Wonder. Yes, he is. Time for a brand integration. So first things first, I do want to say thank you to Wonder for sponsoring this video. And for those of you all who don't know what Wonder is, this is an app that turns keywords or turns prompts really into artwork. And it's nuts how good this is, because there's no differentiation between like a human being and like AI generated art when you use Wonder. It's crazy how advanced it is. So what we're gonna do here is I'm gonna show you guys how to use this app. I have the premium version that I paid for, but I'm gonna put a prompt in here and I'm going to show you all how the whole process works. So we're gonna put in, I mean, we gotta do something comic book related, right? I mean, we're literally a comic book YouTube channel. So we're gonna put in like Spider-Man, Spider-Man, walking on the moon. And then we're gonna give this a cinematic look. We're gonna do it 3x2, and then we're gonna hit create. And so it's gonna throw us in the queue, right? Literally it's gonna say it's queuing up. And then it's going to like literally generate it in front of us, right here. And it looks awesome. Oh my God. I love the way this one looks. But literally, just like right there, you've just got Spider-Man art. You can literally take this, send it out to be printed, and then hang it up in your house, just like that, right? Like, I can't snap. Somebody snap for me. I can't snap. You can do it like lickety split, right? It's really, really cool the way this works. So yeah, this is the app, guys. Again, I use this just for artwork that I'm putting around the house, or if I want to throw something cool on like Facebook, you know, something along those lines, because I'm old, I still use Facebook. Yeah, like this is what I'm doing. So make sure you guys go check the link in the description. Make sure you guys get the premium version, because again, that's the one that unlocks all the really, really cool stuff. But thank you all for watching. Let's get back into our video and talk about Nightcrawlers. So back to our discussion here. So the thing about what's going on here is that we don't exactly know what Stephen Strange is doing in all seriousness, but we do know that with Banshee and with the spirit of variance, there's not a whole lot that we know here. Because of the fact that the spirit of variance was introduced so recently and then immediately thrown into this is gonna be one of those instances where we see the capabilities of what the spirit of variance can do, and that as time progresses, Marvel will likely build on it. But the spirit of variance was at one point a spirit of vengeance, and this is one of the big changes that Marvel's making to the nature of Ghost Rider, the Ghost Rider mythos itself, that when it comes to the spirits of vengeance, they weren't really a collective of beings that existed out there. That instead, the spirit of vengeance was more of a concept. It was the general name given to the dark persona of a Ghost Rider. But the reality here is that how that Ghost Rider gained their powers changed from one Ghost Rider to the next. And so what Marvel's doing here is they're introducing this idea that the spirits of vengeance are more like a spiritual collective that exists out there, not that dissimilar from like cosmic entities, but drastically less powerful, seemingly, and that the spirit of variance was at one point a spirit of vengeance. But unlike the other spirits of vengeance, it had effectively kind of changed its ways, decided to go a different route, and was more peaceful in nature as opposed to destructive, and this led to the spirits of vengeance effectively casting it out. So again, this may be one of those things where it may not necessarily stand the test of time, which is to say in like 5 years, somebody's gonna get rid of it and you'll never see or hear from the spirit of variance again, and it'll kind of go back to just being the traditional spirit of vengeance that exists out there. But again, you know, it's just it's a cool little change to see whether or not it sticks with the general audience or whether or not Marvel keeps it. But that's why you see this different variation of Banshee, or this different appearance of Banshee. Now, the cool thing about this is that in the middle of that, while he's here, he's suddenly set upon by what's called the Legion of the Night. And this group is cool. And it's one of the coolest things that I've seen Marvel do in in recent years. So one of the things we had talked about in the Sins of Sinister one-shot, which again, you'll find the playlist down in the description if you want to get caught up. We're only 2 videos in, so there really isn't a whole lot of catching up to do there. But one of the things that we have found out is that during this 10-year time period, that Sinister was creating what were basically chimera, a sort of merger of different mutants and their powers that existed out there. But one of the things we learned beyond that was Sinister sort of taking over and possessing even non-mutant beings that were out there. Spider-Man is an example of this. And so what's in effect happened here is that you have Toad, you have Sabretooth, you have Spider-Man, you've got X-23, Laura Kinney, you have Pyro, you have people here, right? It looks like Pixie, I'm pretty sure. But you have people here who have basically been merged with the powers of Nightcrawler. And what this does is it turns them into Sinister's most deadly assassins. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if Si Spurrier had taken like X-Men 2, remember like the old Nightcrawler intro from the X-Men 2 film? If that was his motivation for why this was happening, because that scene in that movie made Nightcrawler cooler than I think he'd ever been in the history of Marvel Comics. It was dope to see Nightcrawler as an assassin jumping through the White House and going after the president. So I'm not surprised if this was like a major influence for that. But having characters like X-23 and Spider-Man who have been taken over by the power of Sinister, and their powers have been augmented to basically include the abilities of Nightcrawler where they can teleport around, is cool because they're basically everywhere. Plus, the Legion of the Night is just a dope name. Let's just say it, guys, like it's just ridiculously cool. But one of the funny things about this is that these guys have been on the hunt for Banshee for quite some time. Now, this is when we get this small kind of adjustment to the capabilities of what Banshee can do. That one of the things that happens here is that in this fight, he used what's called the Scream of Change. And this is kind of a differentiation between like the spirit of variance and like the spirit of vengeance. The spirit of vengeance, if we want to go that route and actually accept that as a thing, that it provides its user with something called the penance stare. And that's well known in the Marvel community among Ghost Rider fans. For those of you guys who aren't familiar with the penance stare, what it does is that when it's used on someone, it forces them to feel the pain of everyone they've ever hurt over the course of their life all at one time. But with the Scream of Change, what ends up happening is that when it's used on X-23, it actually breaks the hold that Sinister has on X-23. And when that happens, it actually leads to Banshee not just using it on X-23, but using it on everybody else. And it, in essence, liberates them from the control of Sinister. Now, one of the things right off the bat is that we're told this is not some kind of MacGuffin. It's not some kind of thing where all Banshee has to do is just get like a really, really big bullhorn and just shout into the air and whole cities will be liberated from Sinister's control. One of the things we're told here is that they've tried this multiple times on different people who have been taken over by Sinister and it doesn't work. So for whatever reason, it seemingly works here. So it's really just a way for Spurrier to give us this explanation of how this team can kind of come into existence, but it's not going to be this way across the board unilaterally as far as everyone being possessed by Sinister on Earth. Not only that, what ends up happening here is once this is done, Banshee actually teleports and meets with Mother Righteous. Now again, Mother Righteous was also introduced in Legion of X. One of the reasons why we kind of skipped over the first volume of Legion of X is because it's not very important. It's really just kind of establishing what goes on with Legion himself. You don't really see any like grandiose displays of his power or anything along those lines. It's really just kind of like, here's what Legion and like some other characters are doing like at this point in time. It's a setup story. It's really all it is. Volume 2 is where things get really, really cool. But Volume 1 is by no means essential, at least if you're already familiar with the characters. If you don't know anything about Legion or any of those characters, sure, I guess it's essential to a degree. But the thing about this is that what we find out from Mother Righteous is that she's actually meeting with Orbis Stellaris as well as Dr. Stasis. Now, these are characters that we have talked about before. We covered Orbis Stellaris and Dr. Stasis after we did the Sins of Sinister one-shot. And what we learned is that the Mister Sinister that we've seen all these years in Marvel Comics is just one version of him. That he's more or less a clone of the original Nathaniel Essex. That Dr. Stasis and Orbis Stellaris are the other clones of Sinister, right? So there were like 3 down and 1 to go. We didn't know who the 4th clone was. But as this conversation happens between them, one of the things we find out here is that the Diamond Sinister is kind of operating rogue. The other Sinisters aren't really on board with what he's doing per se. But the reality is to step into the fray and to somehow become involved, it basically risks them becoming controlled by by Sinister. And if that were to happen, there wouldn't really be anybody out there to effectively stand in the way of Sinister. But what Mother Righteous has been doing has actually been working on really manipulating magic and so on and so forth, and trying to find a way to ultimately end these kind of chimera experiments of Sinister, but also working behind the scenes to find the main base of operations for Sinister, where he basically has the Moira McTaggart clones. Now, we talked about that in the last video that we did, where we talked about how Moira McTaggart's power was that every time she died, the timeline was reset. And so Sinister himself is the only one that has possession of the cloning facility, and he has all these different versions of Moira McTaggart, so that if for some reason his experiment goes awry, he can kill one of the Moiras, reset time, but he'll remember everything, right? He'll literally have a kind of database backup that will show him everything that's happened. In his own mind, he won't recall everything, but having it all in a computer system that he can just go back and watch, it basically fills in the gaps for him. So he can continue his experiment from there, becoming aware of what it was that would happen. Like, quite literally, Sinister would go to his base of operations and he would say, okay, here's why the whole experiment failed. So now I'm gonna kill one of the Moira McTaggarts. Sinister, when you watch this, you'll understand everything that went wrong and you'll know where to make our corrections. And he'll just keep doing that and doing that and doing that until he has this kind of perfect timeline where he rules and controls all. So having like Dr. Stasis and having Orbis Stellaris, despite the fact that they are clones of the original Sinister, just like the Sinister with a diamond on his head, they're actively trying to work against him while not being overly obvious about the fact that they're trying to work against him. But the issue of Mother Righteous kind of casting aside some of these spells actually runs in the way of what Dr. Stasis was doing while he was working with Orchis, again, the organization that normally would stand against mutant populations, but at this point is trying to find a way to defeat Sinister. And one of the things he says here is that Orchis commissioned that hex, and while it lasted, Sinister was unable to exploit some of the most dangerous bloodlines. Now he's using the Nightcrawler strain to build his hit squads. So to a degree, while Orchis is not mutant friendly, and Orchis is the organization that exists out there right now trying to bring down the mutant population, the truth about it is that they're standing against Sinister. And before Mother Righteous had gotten involved and kind of destroyed the hex that was used by Orchis that protected these different, really more advanced bloodlines from Sinister's control, people like Nightcrawler, for example, that once she did that, she more or less screwed everything up, right? She more or less kind of torpedoed what Orchis was doing, and that's how we have the Legion of the Night in the first place. And so one of the things that's really picked up on here by Dr. Stasis is that, like, the accent of Mother Righteous, which, judging by the way that it's spelled, or at least pronunciation based on the way that it's spelled, it sounds like, what is it, Cockney English? But one of the things that goes on is that she basically reveals she's the fourth Sinister. Now, if I'm a betting man, to be honest with you guys, I don't think this was the intention of Marvel, which is why I'm not making a great big huge scene out of it. Otherwise it would have been like, and then she takes off her mask and it turns out she's the fourth Sinister. There's a reason why I'm not doing that, because I don't think that was actually supposed to be the case. I think this is what Marvel's doing because of the Sins of Sinister event, but the reality here is that Mother Righteous doesn't have enough history or even enough significance in Marvel Comics for it to actually matter, right? It's one of those things where it's kind of like, I mean, it's cool, I guess, whatever, but it feels more shoehorned in, right? In order to like bolster the popularity of a character that's just not that popular in Marvel. It would have been cooler if it had turned out that like Apocalypse returned and he's like one of the Sinisters or something along those lines, right? By whatever manner and whatever means they want to make that happen. It would have been cool if that was the case, right? Somebody with a long-standing bit of history that under normal circumstances you never would have expected to be a bad guy, but has been manipulating things behind the scenes the whole time. Kind of like a a mutant version of like Captain America during Secret Empire, right? But once this move is made and once these other Sinisters realize that Mother Righteous is basically trying to take them out because she is in effect a good guy, she's trying to eliminate all the different versions of Sinister and just sort of go from there, you end up having Dr. Stasis that makes his move while Orbis Stellaris watches all of it unfold. And where he does recall or at least use some of his own forces to try to take them out, that's when you end up having the Legion of the Night, who are now liberated and operating under Mother Righteous, who show up and immediately attack Dr. Stasis. And so this guy ultimately ends up just going the way of the dodo, right? That's quite literally it. And it's done in one of the coolest ways ever, because X-23 with the Nightcrawler abilities, she has a claw that comes out of her tail. And this is one of those things, I didn't know I needed this until I saw it. This is dope, and I'm really hoping this version of X-23 somehow survives the whole Sins of Sinister timeline and ends up in the main Marvel universe. Because I gotta tell you guys, man, X-23 Laura Kinney with the powers of Nightcrawler and like an adamantium claw in her tail, that's pretty badass, and I'm really hoping that this stays. I really do. And so following the defeat of Dr. Stasis, basically Mother Righteous has this kind of conversation with Orbis Stellaris where he literally reveals, I'm the one who stole the cloning facility facility of Sinister, and I have it in the world form. It's a nigh impregnable place. You can't simply just go in there. So if you kill me, you'll never be able to access the cloning facility of Sinister. It'll be gone forever, right? It'll literally disappear for all time, and we'll be stuck in this timeline. So either you can stay out of my way, and I'll give you safe passage through my realm if that's what you need, or you can try to attack me, possibly even kill me, and then we're trapped in this reality until whenever this timeline comes to a conclusion. And so Mother Righteous ultimately lets him go, which is really the smartest move to make. More so than that, what she also intends to do is to bolster her forces. And so the intention of really just the Legion of the Night alongside Banshee being there is one part to try to find a way to bolster their forces by freeing other individuals, whether it's because this kind of freed Legion of the Night wakes other people up, or because it's the powers of the spirit of variance waking other people up, much like he woke up the Legion of the Night. Ultimately, it doesn't necessarily work. Of course, it is a bit of a heist to a degree where they're looking to steal, particular things. They do end up stealing a magical book, which is not the Darkhold per se, but it is a book that allows Mother Righteous to manipulate spells to a degree. But the bigger part of this is they have to find a way to see if they can get into the world form. And so using a kind of magical enchantment along with the Spider-Man Nightcrawler merger that basically is willing to sacrifice his life because of the fact that for some reason that's not fully explained, those individuals who are not mutants but are possessed by Sinister, they can't stay freed for too long. That the powers of Banshee only work for so long, and then they'll eventually wear off, and Spider-Man would ultimately fall back under the control of Sinister. And in fact, he says as much, right? I can feel those forces, I can feel the voice of Sinister creeping back in again. It's only a matter of time before I succumb to his control, and then I ultimately try to kill all of you guys. Which, for the most part, Spider-Man, with the powers of Nightcrawler, could. He's the perfect assassin. But with Peter Parker sacrificing his life, and with the team now consisting of people like Colossus, as well as looks like a younger Pixie, maybe Magic, it's kind of weird, kind of hard to tell. But with the team's roster being bolstered by like 1 or 2 people, that Peter's life is sacrificed when he literally tries to teleport into the world farm and ultimately perishes in the conflict, right? Perishes during that time because he can't necessarily break through. But what Mother Righteous realizes is that the force field is not impregnable, that given the right level of power, it can be broken through. And so what she does is she sends the rest of the team on what is in effect a kind of scavenger hunt, right? To basically steal various magical artifacts that exist out there. These magical artifacts consist of things like the Darkhold, right? That looks like the Siege Perilous. I'm not 100% sure if it is. If I remember correctly, it is. The Hammer of Thor, the Eye of Agamotto of Doctor Strange, and for those who were eagle-eyed enough, one of the helmets of the Black Priest from Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers run, right? The ability to manipulate magical words. It's like the Black Priests were insanely powerful. They were able to like wipe out whole worlds and different things like that and destroy entire groups of Avengers in one fell swoop. It was nuts. But this is basically some of the most powerful magical artifacts in existence across all of Marvel Comics that are being used and being brought together by Mother Righteous for the purpose of taking down the world farm. These are powers that in some ways rival the abilities of cosmic entities. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching. Make sure you check out Wonder, and I will catch you all later. Peace.